Okay, so here we are. We're just a few days away from Canelo versus Crawford. So, yeah, so I got to kind of try and redeem myself here. Yeah, so right now I picked one right. I picked the Crawford Spence fight right, but I missed on Ryan Garcia versus Tank Davis, and I missed on Danny Garcia versus Erislandy Lara. So yeah, it's kind of tricky to pick these big fights. I mean, there's all kinds of variables and intangibles involved, and yeah, it's just trying to get better at picking these as we go here. I think in the Danny Garcia Lara fight, I think where I missed on that one, I was kind of overestimating the age gap because Lara is definitely he's quite a bit older. The guy's like 42, so. I was kind of banking on him, definitely being, past this day. And, but then also at the same time, didn't realize that Danny wouldn't be able to, break out of his shell, because in order for him to win that fight, he needed to get inside of that big reach advantage that Lara had. And he wasn't able to do that. He just kind of fought the same way that he always does, as if he was fighting a guy that had a similar reach to him, and that's kind of where his downfall was. Lara was able to. It was a technical fight. Lara was able to capitalize on, some nice combination punches. Caught Danny with a, stepped into a punch he didn't seal on the ropes, and and that was that. And then, but I definitely hit on the Spence Crawford fight. I hit that one right, for a Grand Slam home run. I definitely picked that one, and then. Ryan Garcia versus Tank. Well, I think, no excuses. I think the rehydration clause, definitely played a factor in that fight. Like, Ryan definitely his face looked super emaciated. He looked, way skinny beyond what he normally does. And, but he just came out too aggressive in the fight. I mean, he had his moments, but, Tank's got a lot more, like big fight experience than him. And, Danny, I think got caught coming into some punches. And he got caught trying to make too big of exchanges, kind of like too early in the fight. He had, he definitely made some nice contact on Tank, but he just wasn't, he wasn't able to weather the storm, and yeah, so he eventually got hit with that body shot, and that was it. But here we are, the fight at hand here. We got Canelo versus Crawford. And, Crawford's been, mowing everybody down, totally undefeated. He's got, 41 wins, I think it is, no losses. I think he has, 31 knockouts. So, yeah, he's been piecing guys up, man. So, but now he's kind of, jumping up, multiple weight classes after he just jumped a weight class. So he's almost jumping 3 weight classes, really. I mean, in order to become undisputed super middleweight champion, he'll be the first guy to do that, to be undisputed in 3 different weight classes if he can beat Canelo. And, yeah, so basically it's at the Allegiant Arena in Las Vegas, which is the new Las Vegas Raiders venue. And, yeah, it's kind of interesting. Yeah, one of the things a little research I did on it is that, they are fighting in a new ring. It's a $100,000 ring. There's, white diamonds or something like that, and might be some gold in the ring. It is a standard 20-foot by 20-foot ring, so definitely take note of that. And as it sits right now, the odds are in Canelo's favor. So Canelo's a slight favorite at a -175, and Crawford's a slight underdog at a +140. So it should be a good fight. And yeah, so you're just going to kind of, get into the fight here and my prediction and, go over, the reasons why I think that, this is going to be a close fight. Speed advantage, I'm going to give to Crawford. Power advantage to Canelo. Defense, I'm going to give advantage to Crawford. Oh, that's a close one. Age advantage to Canelo. He's almost 3 years younger, even though he's had way more fights. Experience, I'm going to give that, of course, to Canelo. And then stamina, I'm going to give the advantage to Crawford. Even Canelo's been fading a little bit late in the fights, and Crawford's been taking a lot of guys out late. Chin, I'm definitely giving the advantage to Canelo there. Crawford he did the chicken dance against Gamboa, and then he also got dropped against Green Machine. They didn't call it a knockdown. It definitely was. Reach advantage to Crawford. He's got almost a 4-inch reach advantage. Jab advantage to Crawford. Body punching advantage to Canelo. Counter punching, I'm going to give that advantage to Crawford. Heart's really close. I'm going to give a slight advantage to Canelo. Natural weight, I'm going to give a big advantage to Canelo. He's had many fights above 160, at or above 160. Natural weight, 10-ounce gloves, I'm going to give advantage, of course, to Canelo. Crawford's only had one fight with the 10-ounce gloves. Ring IQ, very slight advantage to Crawford. Intangibles, I'm also going to give that advantage to Crawford as well, because he does do the southpaw changeover. Okay, so yeah, Crawford's definitely, putting a monumental task in front of himself in order to try to win this fight. I mean, not that it hasn't been done before, but to jump in another 2 weight classes after he just jumped a weight class to, unify titles at 168, it's a tall order, and although he is, extremely unique and gifted athlete, I think you kind of have to look back at, past history and more recent boxing history to kind of, try and get a better grasp of, is this going to be a possibility? So Henry Armstrong did it back against Barney Ross. Henry Armstrong jumped from 126 featherweight all the way up to 147 to win the welterweight title. He defended all 3 titles at the same time. So it's not like it's impossible to do. But I think the thing that's important to remember is that, those are all with 8-ounce gloves on. So once you get 154-pound professional fighting, and now they use the 10-ounce gloves. And so I think it's important to remember that, Crawford's only had one fight against Madrimov at 154, and he barely won it. Yeah, no longer do they use the horsehair gloves of yesteryear, where you could kind of shift the horsehair around and make it, make your knuckles pronounced more. You can't do that anymore. Now it's mostly foam padding. There are a few brands that have some horsehair in them, but I don't know which brand of boxing glove they're using for this fight. But they are using the 10-ounce gloves, and it's definitely going to be, to Canelo's advantage. And we already kind of saw it in the Madrimov fight. Crawford's punches didn't have the same effect they had at 147 and below. Okay, so De La Hoya here is a perfect example, coming up from, a much lighter weight class. When he got to 154, he definitely struggled with the with the 10-ounce gloves against Castillejo. It finally did drop him in the last round, but it went to the decision. He won it, but then he fought one fight against Felix Sturm at 160, then went directly to Bernard Hopkins. Big mistake. Hopkins is actually naturally a bigger guy, 175-pounder, came down to 160 for most of his career. And you saw the results of that liver shot, infamous liver shot. De La Hoya had a success early, but yeah, Hopkins, once you got past about the 6th or 7th round, it was all Hopkins until he landed the liver shot, and then it was, the end of the day for De La Hoya right there. So, okay, so Kell Brook tried to jump up 2 weight classes from 147 to 160 to take on Triple G. And he had a lot of success early. Was looking like a world beater up until about round 5, I think it was. And then Triple G just totally steamrolled him. Like he broke his orbital. And just another example of what can happen when you jump too many weight classes. Okay, another one that didn't work out too well for the guy moving up in weight was when Trinidad went up to 160 to take on Bernard Hopkins, the 160-pound titles, and that didn't work out too well for him. It was a good fight. I mean, it was competitive, back and forth. Hopkins was a little bit too crafty for him, had a little bit too much power in the end, and it's another example of what can happen when you bite up a little bit more than what you can really chew here. And again, that kind of marked towards the end of Trinidad's career. Okay, yeah, so Crawford's a beast here, man. That fight with Spence was crazy, man. I mean, I couldn't believe that Spence he just kept plodding forward. Even after he got knocked down the first time, kept plodding forward. After he got knocked down the second time, kept plodding forward. Crawford was catching in between the punches, counter punches, body punches, like everything. And Spence never, never changed his game plan. Just, kept falling to the same trap. And so just keep this in mind, for the Canelo fight. And also remember the Canelo versus Khan fight. So, Khan came up from 147 to 160. to meet his demise with Canelo. And yeah, Khan looked like a world beater for the first 5 rounds, but then he ran into that overhand right, and that was the end of the night for him right there. So another, just something to put in the back of your mind for the Canelo versus Crawford fight coming up in just a couple days here. Another important fight was Canelo versus Erislandy Lara. So, Lara's a guy who has an inch reach 1 inch longer than Crawford. He's got a 75-inch reach, and Andy's a southpaw just like Crawford. So, of all of I think Canelo's opponents, Lara is the closest to what Crawford's style is, and in the end, he wasn't able really to deal with Canelo's power. He was mostly like kind of running and getting back up against the rope slot. He had some moments of success and stuff like that. Some people even thought he won the fight, but he didn't win the fight. It was close, but he didn't win it. And so yeah, so as far as the reach and stuff like that, I mean, it's nothing that Canelo hasn't seen before. Okay, so getting kind of towards the end of this video here, and I got to make my final prediction. And yeah, I mean, I think Canelo's going to win this fight. I mean, I think that I think it's going to be either Canelo by decision, or it's going to be a late stoppage by Canelo. I think it's going to be, I guess, maybe around 11 or around 12 stoppage, if it gets stopped. I think there's a pretty good chance of that, though. The main thing is that Canelo is going to need to get his body punches off. So important punch for him. Probably the most important punch for him is going to be the left hook to the body, but of course the straight right to the body. Basically any kind of body punch you can land in on him. He's going to get him up against the ropes as much as he can. Make him feel the fight. Make him kind of feel the power and the size difference. But not too early on in the fight. Crawford's going to be dangerous early. I see Crawford, having an early run in this fight. Just like Kell Brook did against Triple G, just like De La Hoya did against Bernard Hopkins, just like Trinidad did against Hopkins. But where it's going to be more telling is going to be like after the 7th round, after the 8th round. Once Crawford's got some wear on him, what happens after that. But it also depends on how Canelo fights the fight. If he fights unintelligent like Spence did, and just keeps plodding forward, walking into shots. Eventually, Spence is getting hit by those balance shots, because he's getting caught in between his own punches. Crawford was hitting him because he kept coming in. You really can't do that. Canelo needs to, go forward and go back. Smarter if you can catch, Crawford coming into him. Make Crawford move towards him at times and counter Crawford. That's what he needs to be smart about, how he approaches Crawford. And, as far as at one point in the fight, he starts throwing his full-fledged power shots, But I think if he fights smart, I think he can definitely get Crawford out of there and, or at the very least, win by decision. So that's my prediction. And I hope everybody enjoys the fight, man. Got to take my hat off to Crawford, though, for stepping up like this and, making a fight for the fans. And, hasn't been a lot of, great boxing fights this year, man. So hopefully at least we got, one on the books here in just a few days. Peace out. Enjoy the fight.